the president will be implementing tomorrow a 25% tariff.
A 25% tariff on all cars that are not made in the United States.
Those models into the market. So it is a symbol.
The morning began like any other in West Point, Georgia. Workers packed their lunches, put on their uniforms, and prepared for another day at the Kia Motors manufacturing plant, a facility that had become the beating heart of the town's economy. But by midday, everything changed. With no warning, production was halted, the doors were locked, and the plant, once a symbol of modern industrial success in the American South, fell silent. For nearly 15 years, the Kia plant in West Point was more than just a factory. It was a lifeline. Since its grand opening in 2009, the plant had employed over 4,000 full-time workers and supported countless local businesses through a sprawling network of suppliers, logistics companies, and service providers. Restaurants, gas stations, schools, and even real estate developers had grown to depend on the stability Kia promised. Real quick, if you're into videos that cut through the noise and break things down clearly, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps more people find this. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's a good time. We've got more deep dives coming your way. Also, drop a comment and let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your take. Now on to the video. It wasn't just a workplace, it was a promise. One that Kia had made loudly and proudly to the American people, that this South Korean car maker was committed to investing in U.S. soil, providing jobs, and building a future. For the people of West Point, it felt like a long-term partnership. That's why the sudden shutdown hit like a gut punch. There were no media briefings, no company-wide emails sent out in advance, just a quiet directive. Don't come in tomorrow. Wait for further instruction. For workers on the factory floor, many of whom had spent their entire careers assembling Tellurides, Sorrentos, and Optimas, the silence was deafening. Inside the plant, toolkits were still hanging on pegs. Conveyor belts sat frozen mid-line, half-assembled vehicles dangling awkwardly as though time had stopped. Forklifts were abandoned. The buzzing hum of machines, the very rhythm that had become the town's soundtrack, was replaced with eerie stillness. For many, this wasn't just the loss of a job, it was the unraveling of a life plan. Families had relocated to West Point for these positions. Some had invested in homes and education, believing they were building a future in a stable town anchored by a global brand. Overnight, that security evaporated. Local radio stations were flooded with calls from stunned employees. Some cried on air, others expressed disbelief. A few were furious. One caller, a 12-year veteran of the plant, said, "They told us this place would be here for decades, that we were part of something bigger, and now we're nothing." Rumors began to swirl. Some workers cited internal memos about retooling and possible production slowdowns. Others had noticed a decline in parts shipments weeks before the shutdown. Still, nobody expected the complete and abrupt halt of operations, especially not in the middle of the day, with no clarity on when or if operations would resume. Economically, the shutdown sent shockwaves across the region. Local suppliers suddenly found themselves without orders. Independent contractors, from janitorial staff to maintenance crews, were cut off. Even auto transporters reported halted deliveries. The city's economy, once booming thanks to Kia's presence, teetered on the edge of collapse. But beyond the economic fallout was the deeper emotional betrayal. Workers and citizens alike asked a haunting question. Were we ever really part of the plan? Kia's silence in the days following the shutdown only amplified the outrage. There were no immediate press releases, no apologies, no detailed explanation of what triggered the closure. To many, it felt like the company was trying to slip out the back door while no one was looking. West Point had given Kia everything: land, incentives, a dedicated workforce. And now, without so much as a warning, Kia was gone. The plant stood there, lights off, gates locked, a monument to broken promises. But this wasn't just a local tragedy. It was a signal, a sign of a bigger corporate shift, one that would soon unfold across borders, governments, and entire industries. And it all started with the silence in West Point. It didn't take long after Kia's factory shut down for Washington to respond. And the voice that thundered across the national stage was unmistakable: former President Donald Trump. During a campaign rally in Pennsylvania, just 72 hours after Kia's closure announcement, Trump took the microphone and didn't hold back. They want to build in Mexico? They want to build in Korea? That's fine, he said, raising his voice over the roaring crowd. But they will not sell those cars here for free. The room erupted, but behind the applause was a chilling reality. This wasn't just political theater. This was a warning shot. Trump wasn't bluffing. Within days, his administration floated the possibility of a 200% tariff on Kia vehicles not manufactured in the United States. That kind of financial penalty would be catastrophic for any carmaker, especially one like Kia, whose global business model relies on complex international supply chains and assembly plants operating across multiple borders. Historically, tariffs had been used as a way to protect domestic industries, but a 200% figure was almost unheard of in modern U.S. trade policy. For Kia, it spelled doom. The company had long relied on a hybrid production strategy, importing many key components from Korea and China, assembling some models in Georgia, and importing others directly from Mexico and Korea. The model was efficient and cost-effective, until now. When the White House made its threat public, the ripple effects were immediate. Kia's U.S. stock dropped 8% in overnight trading, dealerships reported a spike in customer cancellations, and South Korea's government began scrambling to initiate diplomatic talks. The concern in Seoul wasn't just about Kia, it was about the looming threat of a new auto trade war that could drag in other giants like Hyundai and Samsung. What made the moment even more politically volatile was Trump's tone. This wasn't framed as a business negotiation. It was a nationalist cry, an indictment of foreign companies who had benefited from U.S. tax breaks and state subsidies, only to shift production overseas the moment things got tough. They betrayed American workers, Trump repeated during the rally, and we're going to hold them accountable. And to many Americans, that message hit home. Kia had been welcomed to the U.S. with open arms. Georgia had offered the company hundreds of millions in incentives: free land, tax breaks, infrastructure development, and workforce training. West Point had molded itself around Kia's needs. And now, with one abrupt announcement, all of it was being tossed aside. But beyond the optics and the politics, the numbers painted an even bleaker picture. A 200% tariff on imported vehicles would effectively wipe out Kia's profit margins in North America. For every vehicle sold, Kia would lose thousands. Their best option? Pull out entirely from U.S. manufacturing and shift more production to Mexico, where lower wages and trade agreements under USMCA made business much cheaper. That's exactly what Kia did. But the decision would ignite more than just economic tremors. It would trigger legal action, union backlash, and the collapse of a brand's credibility that had taken decades to build. And while Trump's critics called the tariff threats extreme, even some Democrats supported retaliatory measures, frustrated by what they saw as corporate betrayal. In a rare moment of bipartisan outrage, Congress began calling for investigations into how automakers like Kia used U.S. incentives, only to flee when accountability arrived. In a matter of days, Kia's move shifted from being a private business decision to a national flashpoint. And the company, once praised for its sleek models and affordable prices, now found itself caught in a political firestorm. The message from Washington was clear: if you abandon American workers, you better be ready to pay the price. But as political flames rose, a deeper fracture inside Kia's corporate structure began to emerge, one that had been quietly growing for years and would finally explode into full public view. Just as Kia was dealing with the fallout of its production shift, another crisis erupted, this time one that threatened not just its bottom line, but its very reputation. It started quietly, a standard safety bulletin buried in the back pages of dealership service notices. Then came a trickle of complaints, and finally a flood of reports that forced Kia into the spotlight. The issue? a massive brake system failure affecting more than 125,000 vehicles across the United States. The risk? Complete loss of stopping power while driving. The affected models weren't obscure. They were some of Kia's best sellers: the Sorento, the Telluride, and the Sportage, all vehicles families across America had come to rely on for daily commuting and long road trips. These were the cars that defined Kia's American brand identity: safe, affordable, and practical. Or so buyers thought. But what made this recall so devastating wasn't just the defect itself. It was the fact that Kia knew and chose not to act. Internal service bulletins, later obtained through federal investigations, revealed that Kia engineers had flagged the issue as early as 2021. Yet no public recall was issued until 2024, after dozens of crashes and at least 4 reported injuries. Customers were furious. This wasn't just a technical oversight, it was a betrayal of trust. Parents who had chosen Kia vehicles for their safety felt blindsided. Loyal buyers who had recommended Kia to friends and family were now warning everyone they knew to steer clear. What Kia did next made things worse. Rather than take full responsibility, the company went into damage control mode. Executives released carefully worded statements downplaying the issue, calling it isolated and non-systemic. Instead of launching a robust response plan, they offered vague software patches and quietly updated maintenance schedules. To many, it felt like Kia was hoping the problem would just go away. But in the age of social media, problems don't disappear, they multiply. Reddit threads surfaced, with users sharing terrifying stories of brake failure on highways. YouTube videos documented near-death experiences and ignored dealership complaints. Facebook groups once dedicated to Kia enthusiasts began turning into forums for grievances and grassroots investigations. The real tipping point came when federal regulators stepped in and found clear discrepancies between what Kia knew internally and what it had told the public. A class action lawsuit was filed within weeks, alleging negligence and concealment. Kia's legal troubles were mounting, and its public image was imploding. In the eyes of consumers, this wasn't just a product failure, it was a moral failure. A company that many saw as a trustworthy underdog in a market dominated by giants had now joined the ranks of corporations that put profits over people. And just as customers were grappling with the implications of the recall, another storm was brewing, this time on social media, and led by Kia itself. Most companies, when faced with a safety recall and public outrage, issue an apology, roll out fixes, and promise to do better. Kia instead chose to go on the offensive, and in doing so made a bad situation far worse. Shortly after the brake system recall went public, Kia's public relations machine kicked into high gear, but instead of empathy and transparency, they offered spin, and customers saw through it immediately. Rather than addressing the core issues, Kia's communications team flooded social media platforms with polished videos touting their industry-leading safety standards. Influencer campaigns were launched, showcasing glowing reviews of Kia vehicles, none of which mentioned the ongoing crisis. Dealerships were given scripted talking points, directing them to reassure concerned customers and deflect blame toward third-party suppliers. It was tone-deaf at best, manipulative at worst. The result? Rage. Customers took to TikTok and Twitter to expose what they saw as corporate gaslighting. One viral video featured a former Kia technician who revealed that mechanics were discouraged from flagging systemic issues up the chain out of fear of rocking the boat. He called it corporate censorship in a safety uniform. Other videos showed customers being turned away from service centers, told their vehicle wasn't affected, even when it clearly matched the recall data. The PR campaign, meant to reassure the public, became a lightning rod for backlash. Every tweet Kia posted was met with replies of brake failure stories. Every YouTube ad was downvoted and flooded with angry comments. And Kia's legal language didn't help. Press releases carefully blamed component sourcing inconsistencies and supply chain volatility, sidestepping accountability. There was no admission of fault, no nationwide apology, and no compensation plan for affected owners. That approach might have worked in a pre-social media era. But in 2025, screenshots of internal memos contradicted every public statement Kia issued. Trust eroded by the hour. Meanwhile, competitors seized the opportunity. Toyota, Subaru, and Ford all launched subtle but clearly targeted campaigns emphasizing their commitment to driver-first safety and real-time transparency. Kia was no longer just losing customers, it was handing them to its rivals. And while Kia's PR team kept spinning, something far more powerful than a viral tweet was forming: a worker uprising. Inside the very factories Kia had just abandoned, employees were starting to fight back. Not just against the layoffs, but against the very company they once stood behind. When Kia first opened its West Point, Georgia factory in 2009, the excitement was palpable. For many in the region, it was more than just a job opportunity. It was a ticket to middle-class stability. Workers wore their uniforms with pride. The company hosted family days, provided benefits, and built what seemed like a collaborative relationship with the local community. But that relationship came under fire when the company decided to quietly shut down operations. As the doors locked and paychecks stopped, the narrative changed. The workers no longer felt like valued team members. They felt discarded. What Kia hadn't expected was the explosion of worker resistance that followed. For years, efforts to unionize within the plant had been quietly discouraged. Employees were offered incentive bonuses, performance awards, and town hall meetings meant to foster transparency. But behind the scenes, many say they were pressured not to unionize. Conversations were monitored. Leaflets disappeared from break rooms. HR departments made clear that union talk wasn't welcome. But after the plant closure, that fear evaporated. It started with a single flyer slipped under windshields in the parking lot of a local grocery store. In bold letters, "Safety first, not spin." Within days, hundreds of workers were attending informal meetings across town, some held in church basements, others in public parks. They weren't just talking about pay, they were talking about dignity. The list of grievances was long: lack of transparency, defective part cover-ups, forced overtime without adequate compensation, and now the looming threat of complete abandonment. Workers began organizing, not just out of anger, but out of necessity. Families were suffering, medical bills were piling up, mortgage payments were missed. The message was clear. Kia had turned its back on them, and now it was time to push back. By the end of the month, a formal petition had been signed by over 200 workers calling for union recognition. The United Auto Workers, UAW, stepped in, providing legal counsel and organizational support. Rallies were organized outside the shuttered plant gates, drawing media attention from across the country. Kia's response? Thinly veiled retaliation. Workers began reporting abrupt schedule changes, reductions in hours, and job reassignments that many viewed as punitive. Productivity audits were intensified. Some outspoken employees were put on administrative leave. But rather than quelling the movement, these tactics poured fuel on the fire. What made this uprising unique was its tone. This wasn't just about wages, it was about betrayal. Workers who had given over a decade to Kia felt used. They weren't fighting for more, they were fighting for what they had been promised. As the protests grew, so did national attention. Senators from Georgia and Alabama began calling for investigations into Kia's treatment of American workers. Labor rights organizations launched campaigns titled #KiaLeftus, showcasing stories of former employees now struggling to feed their families. Major publications ran editorials questioning whether foreign automakers were truly committed to American values or just exploiting American incentives. Inside Kia's PR war room, panic set in. Executives began drafting talking points about future investment and operational restructuring, but the public wasn't buying it. The more Kia tried to spin, the more workers pushed back. By late spring, the union had filed formal complaints with the National Labor Relations Board, NLRB, alleging unfair labor practices and intimidation. It was no longer just a factory closure, it was a corporate scandal. And while Kia scrambled to regain control of the narrative, another storm was forming, this time involving a missed opportunity that could have defined the company's future: electric vehicles and the tax credit that got away. As the automotive world races toward an electric future, government support has become one of the key drivers of EV adoption. In the United States, the Inflation Reduction Act of 2023 made this official, offering up to $7,500 in tax credits for buyers who purchase qualifying electric vehicles made in North America with U.S. sourced materials. It was a landmark policy designed to boost domestic manufacturing, reduce dependence on foreign supply chains, and accelerate the shift to sustainable transportation. For American buyers, it meant EVs were more affordable than ever. For automakers, it was a golden opportunity to surge ahead if they played by the rules. Kia didn't. While companies like Ford, GM, and Tesla were racing to build US-based EV supply chains and factories, Kia continued, relying on batteries sourced from Asia and vehicles assembled outside the US. The result? None of Kia's EV models qualified for the new tax credit. For consumers, it was a deal breaker. What had been a potentially attractive $40,000 Kia EV was now priced $7,500 higher than a comparable Ford or Chevy, simply because Kia hadn't built it in the right place with the right parts. Sales plummeted. Dealerships reported sharp increases in order cancellations. Financing applications were dropped. Many buyers who had pre-ordered EV models like the EV6 walked away, unwilling to pay thousands more for a vehicle they could no longer justify. Kia's marketing department was blindsided. For months, they had built campaigns around federal savings, promising affordability and cutting-edge innovation. Brochures, websites, and showroom posters had to be pulled or revised. The sales teams were forced to explain the unpleasant truth to frustrated customers. But what truly hurt Kia was the company's tone-deaf response. Rather than accepting the exclusion and pivoting strategy, Kia executives attempted to lobby for an exception. Their argument? That Kia was planning to build battery and EV assembly plants in the U.S. in the coming years and therefore should qualify in advance. Lawmakers weren't convinced. Senators across both parties dismissed the request as premature and unsubstantiated. One official noted, "Planning to invest is not the same as investing. These credits were designed to reward commitment, not intention." The damage extended beyond the sales floor. Competitors wasted no time capitalizing. Tesla slashed Model 3 prices. GM emphasized "Made in America" in bold letters across their new campaigns. Even Hyundai, Kia's corporate sibling, began rerouting resources toward U.S. operations to avoid a similar fate. Kia's exclusion from the EV tax credit wasn't just a regulatory setback, it was a branding catastrophe. It signaled that the company was out of touch with the political winds shaping the future of transportation. And worse, it confirmed what critics had long suspected, that Kia's U.S. presence had always been transactional, not foundational. They didn't build here to stay. They built here until it became inconvenient. The fallout was massive. Resale values dipped. Analysts downgraded Kia's outlook. Buyers began questioning the company's long-term vision. And for the first time in over a decade, Kia's grip on the American market began to unravel. Not because their products weren't good, but because they weren't eligible. Facing mounting pressure and crumbling consumer trust, Kia made its next move, and it would prove to be the most controversial decision yet. As the U.S. backlash mounted and factory gates in Georgia remained closed, Kia quietly began shifting major production lines to Mexico. It wasn't a surprise to insiders. This move had been years in the making. But for the American public, it was the final straw. For Kia, Mexico offered undeniable advantages. Under the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, automakers could assemble vehicles south of the border and still enjoy favorable trade terms as long as certain labor and parts sourcing conditions were met. Combine that with lower wages, looser environmental regulations, and reduced operational costs, and the move seemed like a no-brainer on paper. But what looked like smart strategy from Seoul looked like economic betrayal from West Point. The transition happened swiftly. Suppliers in the southern U.S. began reporting canceled contracts. Transport routes changed. Workforce downsizing turned into layoffs. In Georgia, trucks once filled with brand new Tellurides sat motionless. Local mechanics noted fewer service parts arriving. It wasn't just a downsizing, it was a dismantling. The optics were brutal. Kia had once been the poster child for Korean American industrial cooperation. The West Point plant had been hailed as a symbol of resurgence in southern U.S. manufacturing. It brought pride to a town that had seen textile mills vanish and steel plants shuttered. But now, that symbol was collapsing, and Mexico was the beneficiary. In states like Guanajuato and Nuevo León, government officials welcomed Kia with open arms. Press events celebrated new job creation. Construction permits were fast-tracked, and while Mexico celebrated, American workers watched from a distance, helpless. Critics across the U.S. political spectrum erupted. Conservative lawmakers called the move anti-American. Progressives labeled it corporate exploitation. Editorial headlines read, "Kia cashes in, then bails out." And the backlash wasn't limited to speeches. Within 48 hours of the Mexico announcement, Capitol Hill lit up with calls for emergency economic action, tariffs, lawsuits, and restrictions on any company benefiting from U.S. subsidies that offshored labor. For Kia, it was a PR disaster wrapped in an economic gamble. But what the company didn't count on was the emotional reaction. This wasn't just numbers on a balance sheet, it was personal. For many Americans, especially in the South, buying Kia wasn't just about price, it was about pride. They believed in the brand because it believed in them. Now that belief was shattered. And as Kia finalized its pivot southward, questions mounted. Would the production ever return? Would Mexico become the new norm? And most importantly, was Kia still a company Americans could trust? The answer for many was already clear, and the consequences of that answer were only just beginning. Kia's shift to Mexico didn't go unnoticed on Capitol Hill. What had once been a relatively quiet corporate retreat now looked like a calculated abandonment of American workers, and lawmakers, both Democrat and Republican, weren't about to let it slide. The reaction was swift and multi-layered. Within 48 hours of Kia's formal announcement that it would transfer the production of key models to Mexican facilities, several U.S. senators began drafting a retaliatory response. Emergency tariffs were proposed, existing trade exemptions were questioned, and multiple class action lawsuits were filed in U.S. courts by consumers and dealerships alike, accusing Kia of fraud, supply manipulation, and violating good faith clauses in state incentive contracts. The U.S. government wasn't just angry, it was embarrassed. Kia had received hundreds of millions in public subsidies, from land grants to tax breaks to training programs, based on promises that its presence in the U.S. would be long-term and job-generating. Now, with factory doors shuttered and jobs moved across the border, it felt like a bait-and-switch of monumental proportions. Perhaps the most notable response came from labor groups. The United Auto Workers, UAW, called for a boycott of all Kia vehicles not manufactured domestically, urging union members across the country to stand in solidarity with the laid-off workers of West Point. The boycott gained traction, appearing in local news reports, social media campaigns, and even on picket lines at unrelated auto plants. Dealerships were next to speak up. Multiple Kia dealerships across the Midwest filed complaints alleging the company misrepresented inventory forecasts and delivery timelines. They claimed they had been misled into ordering high volumes of vehicles, only to later be informed that supply would be delayed indefinitely, or worse, diverted to non-U.S. markets. Some dealers even alleged that Kia favored Mexican output over existing U.S. dealership contracts, cutting off American retailers from new inventory while quietly increasing allocation to other regions. This not only strained relationships, but ignited suspicions that Kia had been planning its exit far earlier than it publicly admitted. In Washington, the bipartisan tone of the backlash made it politically explosive. Republicans lambasted Kia as a foreign leech, while Democrats accused the company of wage dodging and environmental offshoring. For once, both sides of the aisle were aligned, and their anger was laser-focused. Soon, congressional committees began reviewing loopholes in the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, that allowed companies like Kia to shift production and still enjoy favorable tariff treatment. Proposals emerged to tie future tax credits, incentives, and market access to long-term job guarantees and domestic production minimums, rules that could spell disaster for companies like Kia and even affect others in the pipeline. And the damage didn't stop at Kia. Other foreign automakers with mixed U.S. and international production lines started to panic. Hyundai, Volkswagen, and BMW began issuing press statements reaffirming their commitment to American workers, scrambling to separate themselves from the negative headlines. Internal meetings across Detroit, Seoul, and Stuttgart became dominated by one burning question: are we next? Kia's decision to prioritize Mexican production might have made short-term financial sense, but it ignited a firestorm that threatened to reshape the entire regulatory landscape of auto manufacturing in North America. And while lawsuits dragged on, tariffs loomed, and boycotts spread, something far more powerful was unfolding, not in courts or Congress, but in the minds of everyday American drivers. Because once trust is broken, it's not tariffs or lawyers that determine a brand's fate. It's customers. Kia's downfall wasn't just about one company making a strategic retreat. It was about the consequences of broken promises, promises to workers, to communities, and to the very consumers who believed in the brand. What began as a quiet factory shutdown spiraled into a geopolitical flashpoint, a PR disaster, a union uprising, and a collapse in customer trust. And as the dust settles, we're left with more than just lawsuits and tariffs. We're left with lessons. In today's world, loyalty has to be earned, not assumed. Automakers are no longer judged by the shine of their ads or the sleekness of their designs, but by the weight of their commitments. Where do they build? Who do they support? What happens when things go wrong? For consumers, the road ahead requires vigilance. It's not just about horsepower or price tags anymore. It's about transparency, stability, and a brand's willingness to stand by its people. Not just when times are good, but when they get hard. Because when a company walks away, it's not just inventory left behind. It's families, workers, communities, and in Kia's case, a reputation that may never fully recover. So before you choose your next car, ask yourself, is this a brand that stands with me or one that might leave me behind? Once again, thanks for watching this video. If you got something out of this, hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next one. And hey, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Agree, disagree, or something in between. I'd love to hear it.